Hey, welcome to the Tuesday show. I'm Ultra David.
And I am James Chen. How's everybody going?
It's going great. So we got some topics up here. As you can see, we have catering to pros. Which is, yeah, we'll talk about that. Texas Showdown happened. We were there. There were a bunch of other tournaments that also occurred. We will discuss them. Then we'll talk about the Dragon Ball FighterZ patch. By the way, it's out.
Oh, it dropped already?
It did. And just before I left, I saw that my Steam was updating itself. It was a 2.9 gig patch.
Ooh.
So I haven't actually had a chance to try it yet, but I have read a little bit on Twitter about what's going on. So
okay, well, I mean, they did add. Well, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. We'll get there. Yeah.
Though that's what we're going to be chatting about. But let's start off with this first thing: catering to pros.
Right. So how did this come about exactly? So we had some esports from some prominent esports personalities. Esportsmen in the fighting game community, talking a little bit about how the fighting game community might not be able to succeed as well because we don't focus enough on the pro players in a way, because they're the ones that get sponsored, they're the ones that have the logos all over their jerseys and all this stuff like that. So, you know, the more stream time they get, the happier the sponsors are, the happier I'm talking about sponsors in terms of like the teams like Echo Fox, et cetera, are to see their players on stream all the time. So our events should be more invitational based. You know, we should have the pro players on there guaranteed all the time. And, you know, some people brought up amateurs, and, you know, the response was, well, if they want to have a chance, if they want to have the opportunity to play pro players, then put on a separate amateur tournament and like have two of them come out of there to be able to get into the pro tournament and then play the pros that way.
Right.
So they basically have to fight for the right to play against the pros.
Right.
So
yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think I would place the origin of it even maybe a little bit further back with Richard Lewis on. He's been both attacking and defending himself like a lot lately.
Yes, on social media.
And so I feel like the real genesis of this was not like, how can we help the fighting game community? It was more like lashing out.
Right.
And in lashing out, maybe some other people agreed with the general idea, but I really think the origin of it was like him lashing out against people in the fighting game community who he believes have been attacking him. Sometimes not just believing, to be frank, but but you know, I really think that's what the ultimate origin of this was. He had beef and he wanted to get it out, and then, you know, Monte Cristo and other people like chimed in and stuff.
Right.
So I think that's more like what it's about. But I obviously I am very much in favor of keeping the FGC open in the way that it is. That is, it's our history. Obviously, that is what it's always been, and I don't want to see. I feel like that is one of the important things about the scene that I think needs to be maintained as we professionalize, because we are professionalizing.
Right.
Players and commentators and streamers and organizers and all that stuff. There's a growing group of people who make their money on it.
Right.
Which is literally professionalizing. So that process is occurring, but in that process, as we've often discussed, we need to make sure that we keep the parts of the FGC that we all care about the most, that seem like the most fundamental parts of our community and our scene. And that really is at the heart of what is most fundamental about the FGC.
Yeah, you know, our scene came from arcades. This was kind of what I was saying on Twitter at one point when I kind of chimed in on this whole entire topic. Our scene came from the arcades, and the arcades are really about, you know, once you put a quarter up, it was your right to play. You know, it didn't matter who you were when you came into an arcade. It was your right to play. And it's a very face-to-face kind of thing in the fighting game community as well, right? And in that way, you know, again, you know, in the arcade days, if we didn't like you, if you were a stranger, we could give you evil stares or whatever like that, but eventually you would end up playing.
And like we were having a chat with
that's why I said it.
With Commander Jesse, who happened to be on the same plane ride that we had. We all happened to sit in the same exact row because it's Southwest. You can pick where you sit.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And he said that when he first went to Arcade Infinity in Southern California, he put his quarter up, and somebody like didn't want to let him play at the start. He finally did play, but then when he lost, he felt like everybody was like, "Yeah, get out of here, kid."
Right. Yeah.
You know? And so he never came back. So it's not always perfect.
Right,
obviously.
But that's the thing is,
but the ideal, and it has often been not just the ideal, but the practicality of it, is that anybody can play.
Right, but the thing about it is, even in that story, Jesse still played.
He did still play.
He still play, and like I said, we can give you the dirty stares. We can be like, "Yeah, get out of here, kid," but you always could come back, and you could always keep challenging if you wanted to. And in fact, a lot of players earn that respect in arcades by being terrible and coming back and continue to play.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? As long as you put the quarter up, there was no way we could stop you from playing. No one ever grabbed your quarter, threw it back at you, and said, you can't play because it's a commercial establishment, right?
Yeah.
So you just can't do that, right?
Right.
But regardless, that kind of mindset still pervades, and also the face-to-face kind of mindset, which is why the fighting game community is not, VIPs behind roped areas, et cetera, and the fact that anyone who plays, it's like putting up a quarter is like paying your entry fee now to a tournament. As long as you pay your entry fee, you are allowed to play. And that's it. I don't care if you're Daigo. I don't care if you're Justin Wong. I don't care if you're Knuckle Dew or Problem X or if you're Joe Schmo. Mm-hmm. If you paid your money, you're getting put in the bracket. You're going to play just the same. You're going to play through the pools just like everybody else. You're not going to have any special training areas or anything like that. You get the same thing as everyone else because everybody is a player and everyone's equal.
Yeah, and the lines between who is a pro player and who's an amateur are very murky in the FGC. There's no professional league. There's no exclusive league, maybe more accurately, like there is in Overwatch and League of Legends, in which the members of certain teams are the only pro players.
Right.
Other than that, there are some semi-pros. There are like collegiate, whatever you call them, pros. I don't know that they're pros, but you know what I'm talking about, collegiate players.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then there's like the amateurs. Then there's Joe Schmo. There's everybody else. Right. There are some pretty clear, bright lines. Mm-hmm. And the FGC, that is definitely not the case. It's not just that that's because anybody can play. It's also just because there's not enough money in it for there to have been developed a core group of players who are making wild amounts of money. There are like 3, maybe 4 people who have made wild amounts of money on FGC. Right. Everybody else is in this kind of nebulous block where some people have made more money, some people have made a little bit of money, and there's like it's kind of all moving around constantly. Mm-hmm. And so it would be very difficult, I think, to decide where the line is between a pro player and an amateur player, because I'll tell you, there are players who are sponsored, who are on teams, who still have jobs, secondary actual jobs. Are they pros just because they're sponsored? Because they're on a team? Because that's not actually their job, right? It's not the profession. At the same time, there are people who make it their profession who aren't on a professional team.
Right.
I don't know where you draw.
I mean, even like Knuckle do right now,
that's what I'm thinking of, yeah. It's obviously he's one of the best in the world, but there's no, if you were just going to be like, all right, you got to be a member of X and Y team to be in whatever pro league, he's not part of it right now.
Right.
So I don't think that it's as simple. I felt like there was a good explanation of part of why, even on top of the history that our scene has, that we don't have the clear pro versus amateur divide, was some people I saw on Twitter talking about how it's an individual game versus a team game, and how individual sports oftentimes don't have that clear divide between pro and amateur. In golf and tennis, it's not as clear. Obviously, you got the true professionals at the very top, but in the middle, there's kind of like a nebulous spot, you know?
Because in teams, they control it, so you have to get on a team.
Yeah.
So it's very clear, but individuals, it's almost like writing music, You're just like throwing your hat in there and just trying. Anybody can kind of
Anybody
do it.
Anybody can do it, as long as you got the time and skill and whatever. So I think that's a really good way to put it, because we have many of the same dynamics in the FGC that tennis and golf and whatnot have. And I guess the individuality of the game is probably a big part of why.
Right.
So, again, this is just to say that I really don't think that there's an obvious line in most cases between amateur and pro players. There's really only a few you can point out as like the obvious pros. Right. And so it's futile, I think, to try to draw a line in the way that they seem to want to.
And plus the other thing too, for me, just the implication of, okay, then give a tournament to amateurs so that two of them can qualify so they can try to join the pros. Yeah. That makes it sound like it's a privilege.
Right.
It would
literally be a privilege.
Yeah, it would be a privilege to play the pros, and to me, I think that's their right. Again, from the fighting game community, this is kind of how I said it exactly on Twitter. It's their goddamn right to be able to play these people. If you end up, matched up against Daigo in round 1, that's just how it works. And you got that opportunity, and it's cool. You get to play against him. That's what a lot of people like about the poker scene, right?
Sure, poker's the same way.
Right, even in games like tennis, right? Like if you're not good and you just barely qualify into like like a Grand Slam, you could end up playing Federer in first round.
Yeah, you could.
That's just the way it is.
Right.
And sure, they have qualifiers to get into there, but that's just because you can't have more than 64 people in a Grand Slam. Otherwise, that thing would run for 10 years.
I get
basically,
it.
Right? There's a different thing. It's a time.
Right.
It's a time issue, right? So it's a different kind of setup. But everybody has the right to try to get to that point. You know what I mean? So, and another thing too is just that. Oh, what was the point that I wanted to make? There was something else that I said on Twitter as well. It's just that. Oh shoot. Oh, my brain just kind of slipped right there.
Well, while you're thinking about it,
I
remember you bringing up that point, and we discussed this in the car a little bit, but I feel like it's in a state of nature kind of situation, the pros in League and Overwatch wouldn't only be playing against the pros, they'd be playing against everybody.
Right.
That's how the game was on launch. And so instead of it being a privilege for amateurs to play against the pros, the reality of those leagues is that the privilege is the right is that everybody gets to play against each other, and instead they've carved out a set of privileges for the professional players so that they only have to play against each other.
Right.
So rather than it being the case where pros get to play against each other, that's the state of things, and then maybe an amateur can play against them, that's a privilege. It's totally the opposite in reality.
Right.
So I feel like that recognition is something that folks in esports don't have, or maybe want to avoid for marketing purposes. But
Right.
I really think that is more of the natural state of things. It's just that they have constructed barriers to playing against the pros that I really don't want to see, and I think would be impractical in any case in the fighting game scene.
Yeah. So. And again, it's one of the coolest things to me that in the fighting game community that we have tournaments of 5,000 players. I mean, what other gaming scene can even talk about that? 5,000 entrants for Street Fighter V at one point.
EVO's the biggest open tournament in the world.
Right. And, just to be able to say that, pros and amateurs alike, everyone throwing their hat in the ring, it's very much like poker kind of a situation.
Yeah.
The WSOP, you could end up at the table with a bunch of pros and everything. And, if you do beat one of the top players, it's not a fluke. I mean, it's just straight up. It's just how it works, right? I mean, if a top player gets beat by some random person, that person's not that bad, right?
They can't be.
It's just never going to happen,
Yeah.
right? A top player is never going to have that bad of a day,
Right.
unless they just accidentally disconnect their controller 4 times, and the other person was like, "I'll take every round,"
Yeah. Or like Myers on the internet, maybe his router just dies.
Yeah, exactly.
Which did
right.
happen.
Yeah.
But yeah. Other than that, obviously, you're right.
And then just guys like Mena RD, he was never a pro last year, in 2016, 2016 SCR, when he first really kind of showed up on the scene. And, he'd been playing a little bit and stuff like that, but he only got to that point because of the open tournament
Of course.
scene. Punk only got that way because of the open tournament scene. He got to do Red Bull Battlegrounds, and that's where he kind of got his shine. And he never traveled that much. In
Right.
fact, Jesse was saying that Art kept calling him the East Coast best secret, and he just never wanted to travel.
Right.
Finally, he did.
In high school, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, he was in high school, exactly.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's always that situation. All these guys come from nowhere.
Just instructively, I'm looking at the Texas Showdown top 8, and I can recall a time, many cases not very long ago, when all of these players were the upstart randos. That's not true. I don't actually recall the time when Ricky Ortiz was. Because that was before. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, you do. I don't. It's before my time. But everybody else here, I can recall a time a year and a half ago for Mena, you know, most recently. But I remember when Chris T was starting up and we thought he was the random online Ken who would just do random uppercuts.
He was terrible.
He was bad. And think about Snake Eyes winning his very first tournament, which happened to be Evo. He just showed up and he did it.
Yep.
There was no pre-existing, like, watch out for this guy, or let's only invite these top players, in which case he wouldn't have been there to win Evo.
Right.
So
and, you know, I mean, I'll tell for Ricky, you know, she was trained by the East Coast MVC2 players before Justin Wong finally came out, and our West Coast champion was Alex Vai at the time for MVC2. And she basically flew out to a Southern Hills Golfland tournament, you know, to kind of represent the East Coast. And we were like, whatever, we're the best. And she ended up beating Alex Vai in grand finals.
Right.
And, you know,
that's how it always goes.
And everyone was like, what happened? You know, and we were all mad because it was Runaway Storm. And, you know,
right.
Yeah, and everyone was like, this is cheap. And so, I mean, it's the way it works, man.
That is the way it works. I think that folks in esports have a problem with memory. This is something that I've often thought about that scene. You have a memory that goes back to the very beginning of the fighting game community. Mine goes back to 2002, which at this point is quite a while ago. We have been around in the same scene for a long period of time. That's not the case for almost any other esports.
But see, I mean, that's crazy to me because one of the people that was kind of having this conversation was Scoots.
Yeah, Scoots is a funky choice, I think.
To use James Chen language, he's like 87 years old, right? I mean,
you know, he is older than you.
Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah. That's right, because I usually call myself like,
no, he has a history for sure, and he was around for a lot of the early shooter stuff.
That's the thing that's crazy to me.
I can't speak to his full story. I mean, I know a little bit about him, and I've hung out with him a little bit. Very nice guy in person. I don't know, but there's very little left of the Quake scene from those times, and there's very little left even of what the Counter-Strike scene used to be back in the day. There are very few games that trace their time back to the 90s that are still significant. If anything, it's maybe StarCraft Brood War, which has come back kind of lately.
Right.
But the StarCraft scene, you know, puts its roots at about 99, 2000, something like that. Like that's like the oldest extant esport is that. There's nothing else that really compares with the FGC in terms of the scene's history and memory, and all that stuff still survives. You're still around, and I'm still around, and we are influencing the people who come, whether we even intend to or not. The people who come into the scene pick up the things that were already in the scene, and so it's self-perpetuating to some degree. That's
what kind of what we're all like fighting for, to make sure that never goes away.
Of course. But that's rare in esports scene, and it doesn't exist at all in the most recent major esports game in Overwatch. It was just created out of whole cloth. You know, some of the players come from TF2 and Halo and stuff. I mean, the players themselves have histories, but what the larger scene was just constructed by Blizzard. The game was just developed by Blizzard. They got to set all the rules. They got to create the league in whatever way they wanted to. And so it's the same way with Hearthstone. It's the same way with League of Legends. There's a history there. It was from Warcraft 3 and so forth, but most of the players come in through League of Legends itself at this point, have been for a long time, and Riot gets to set all the rules. That just does not exist in the fighting game scene. It's totally the opposite.
Yeah,
game developers and rights holders, if they want to create leagues, they need to fold themselves into what the scene is already doing.
Right.
That's the only way to make things work. They know that. So Capcom Pro Tour and Tekken and Injustice, etc., they fold themselves into existing tournaments because everybody would just riot if they were like, all right, no more Evo, no more whatever. We're doing our own things. They cannot do that. So we are, although I love it, we're bound by history to a very significant degree, in a way that I think that lots of esports folks don't consider, because it's not relevant for them. For them, it's the last 10 years. In very few cases, it's the last 15, maybe 20. But for us, it's almost 30 years.
Right.
It's just a different story.
And plus another thing, too, is just that you mentioned Tekken, you mentioned Injustice. That's another thing that makes us extremely different, is that we do have all these different game companies, right? So for Blizzard to create Overwatch League, it's beneficial to them, and they can be like, let's put all this money into there. But we can't do that in the fighting game community. Even if Capcom was going to come along and be like, we're going to sponsor CEO, here's all this money and stuff like that, then they can also say, you can't run Guilty Gear, you can't run Injustice because you're a Capcom event now, right? You can only run Capcom tournaments. And we don't want that. And so it's hard to have that kind of situation occur where, you can get, I don't know if you want to call it esports, to the point where like events like that are going to be sponsored by a publishing company. We're always going to get, they're always going to be self-created. They're always going to be sort of grassroots. EVO is still grassroots in a lot of ways. It's funded literally by itself, right? Like not a lot of events get that kind of thing. And so it's funded literally by itself. And so, it's just that, this whole desire to cater to pros and do all these things and these ideas. I remember what I wanted to say now is just, from my tweets, it's just that one template just doesn't apply to everything.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And it just literally feels like that they want to take the template that they kind of already know, that they've already established for esports, which again is why I don't like the term esports, because it's a marketing term, whatever like that. But, they're
it implies homogenization.
Right. It implies marketing strategy as opposed to this is just what's good for the community. You know what I mean? It's marketing strategy is we're explicitly trying to alter everything to make money, as opposed to, hey, let's have this community that we're just trying to grow and keep everybody happy and everything like that. And so, their template just doesn't apply to the fighting game community. And a lot of it comes from, I don't want to call it ignorance, but it's just that they just don't know the fighting game community.
It definitely it's ignorance. I mean, I've talked with... I put out that article, which I recently read again, Momentum Matters, in 2011, which was all about basically this topic.
Okay.
That was 7 years ago. And I remember after that happened, I talked with a lot of people in the esports scene at now defunct NASL and other things. And they wondered, why is it that the FGC can't just professionalize itself? Why don't you guys... I mean, it's literally the same conversation.
Right.
Literally the same conversation. 7 years ago. And it was with, I remember talking with Scoots about it. I remember talking with other people in esports about it, people from MLG and the like, who are still asking why it's not the way that they want it to be.
Right.
All this time later. So it's not... It's ignorance. I mean, they may, I don't know what their intentions are. They, I'm sure, have good intentions. I know some of them, and I'm sure that it's good. I don't know about all of them, but certainly for some of them, I just really think that there's a lack of knowledge, and that's not, at this point, I think something that's easily defended, because it's been going on for so long. If you just want to know about what the FGC is like, spend time with us. Figure, because other people have done so. Red Bull's doing a great job. ESL did a great job. Some of the major esports teams have done great jobs. Some of the big esports media groups have done really good jobs. All this stuff is definitely possible with the scene, but you have to take the time to learn a little bit and get rid of whatever ignorance you have, and you can't use a one-size-fits-all policy. And if you do those things, then it's going to be great. But if you don't, then you're just going to, in another 7 years, in 2025, we're going to be having the same conversation with people.
And again, one thing that I do want to mention is that there's nothing wrong with invitationals. I'm totally fine with that. Like even Lap Chi doing the Master Series coming up this weekend, there's a lot of exhibitions.
The FGC has a long history of having invitationals. That is fine.
Red Bull Kumite has been doing a fantastic job with that, for example, for invitationals. Even E-League is kind of like an invitational, right? It literally is an invitational. And that's not a problem. We're not saying get rid of any of that stuff. Like that's the main
I like
thing.
those. I enjoy them a lot.
And one of the main things that the hardest thing about this is social media, internet, all this stuff like that has made it so that if you argue against B, then you want none of B. You just want to get rid of everything about it, right? And so I even ended up in a discussion with somebody who was just like, well, why don't you want any of this esport? I'm like, dude, like, do you not recognize that I'm trying to help grow this as professionally as possible?
Well, right.
And I want to do all this stuff. You know, it's not that I just want to eject all of esports. I kept saying FGC can do their own version of esports. Right? Maybe we won't even call it esports, you know, we'll just be FGC. Like, we want to grow it. I want to see pro players make money too and everything like that. But the thing about it is, I don't want to be the one to select who is the pro player to make that money.
Of course.
Right? I want to let the scene decide that just by tournaments, right? And so Mena RD is going to be able to come out here, win a ton of money, and change his country. Like, literally change his country, right? And if we had only invitationals, that would have never happened. Right? And so the whole thing is just like, I do want to professionalize it. You know, I've definitely been on the side of esports here and there from time to time because I do want things to grow and I do want it to become a big kind of like, you know, industry that people can watch and appreciate and everything like that. It's just, I don't want to do it the same way that everybody else does, in their template, et cetera, et cetera. So even while I argue against all this stuff, there's still parts of it that I am, you know, trying to embrace in a lot of ways.
I don't see any conflict with that.
Right.
I haven't seen a conflict with that in a long time. I don't know why anybody believes that there is a conflict with that stuff. And as we've often said, we want to make sure that the growth that the FGC has is sustainable, that we're not just rocketing to the moon and then all of a sudden we fall back down. That'd be crappy. You know, we want to build a big base, and from that base have a lot of players and a lot of talent and all that stuff. A lot of viewers. I don't want it to be some top-down thing because I feel like that's not as sustainable. And this is not just a business to me. It's a community. Again, there's the historical aspect of it. If the Overwatch League dies, that's a big business loss for a lot of people. It would be a really big bummer. It's not a community in any way in the same sense that the fighting game community is a community.
Right.
There are people who view teams and fandoms as part of their communities, but the larger thing is not at all comparable to the community aspect of the FGC. So for people to talk about how, you know, sort of applying the ideas with respect to community that the Overwatch League has to the FGC, it's just nonsense. It doesn't make any sense at all.
And again, just like, you know, I'm sitting here reading the chat and getting a lot of things here too, but what was I about to say? I don't know why my brain is not working today. But, anyways, continue forward, so. You know, yeah, that's right. I remember what I wanted to say now. It was just, you know, about the invitationals thing. You know, again, the invitational things is fine, but I just always want to make sure that the open tournaments are the focus. They need to be the biggest thing. They need to be the most important thing. You know, the point where the invitationals start becoming more important than the open tournaments is a problem.
For sure, dude.
In my opinion. So, yeah,
for sure.
You go. Yeah.
And of course, top-down style can work. It's currently working like gangbusters when it comes to League and Overwatch. It's not the style that I want, and furthermore, it's not the style that is possible when it comes to the fighting game scene, because we've already been self-organized around a concept for almost 30. Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Edition comes out soon. I mean, it's that kind of history, and that can't be ignored when it comes to how the scene is organized. I just, you know, if your history in scenes is to come up through an already sort of sportsified esport kind of world, and then sort of float around between StarCraft and Hearthstone and Overwatch and whatever else League, then I kind of get why you wouldn't consider the very community-focused history of the FGC, because it's just not your experience. Okay, but that's all right for your own stuff, but please do consider our experience when it comes to our own things, because that is a big influence on how things go. So I look forward to talking about this again in 2025. It will, I'm sure, be an issue moving forward. I just don't see why it wouldn't be. But it's something that I certainly hope to talk with people about. I've talked with them about it for that long, and not just in 2011 and now, but in all of the years intervening. And when when I did MLG commentary, when we did ESL, a bunch of times we did ESL. I've talked with people involved in both of those things about this. They ask me, about this stuff. It's just an ongoing topic, and not as many people as I would like have learned the lessons that I think are not that complicated,
right?
To be honest. So.
And yeah, definitely some groups have done a good job with that.
They have. It's totally possible.
Right. Exactly.
So there's, I don't have anything against working with anybody. Just make sure that you're not attacking our friends and saying that the way we organize the scene is stupid. And so,
right. Exactly. Exactly.
Then you'll be golden.
And and it might be just a few voices, but these are very prominent voices. Right, and that's the main thing, and it's prominent voices coming from an ignorant standpoint, an uneducated standpoint, and so it's just tough. It's tough listening to somebody, shit on something that you've been working on for 30 years. I mean, for me, almost literally.
Indeed.
And just to hear someone saying that you guys don't know what you're doing, et cetera, even though we're in the Mandalay Bay Arena, and
we're doing fine.
Nobody can take that away from us, kind of thing. So, so.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
History matters, everybody.
Yes.
Pretty hard. It's pretty hard to like what if you were to organize a giant campaign to go take over a country in the Middle East, and you'd be like, hey, guess what? Next year it'll have a democracy. It's just, come on. Learn a little bit from history. Come on.
Oh my God.
It's not that tough, I really think. But, so things go.
I mean, it's not even just esports and fighting game community or whatever.
No, that's the whole world.
It's just what you know is what you know, and you think that's what's going to apply to everything. And, I even said this on Twitter as well, that, at one point in time, that's why, we even had a whole episode. We were mad at the Smash community for, trying to do the skip the pools and the VIP areas and all that stuff like that. And it was that's not how the FGC does things. And we were doing the same thing. We were trying to apply one bucket of...
we were screwing up.
Yeah, we were trying to apply one template to everything. Yeah. And then after a while, I was like, this is the exact same goddamn thing, right? They can do whatever the hell they want. They don't have an arcade culture. They can do whatever the...
I mean, it's important to have introspection and take criticism seriously.
Right, exactly.
Change how you think about things.
And I wouldn't... Nowadays, whatever they decide to do, I'm like, go for it, dude. That's you guys. That's what you want to do. So.
And, by the way, it's pretty cool that Bardolph's in here. What's up, bub?
Yeah, that's right.
Because you know some of these folks, too.
Yeah.
I'm not concerned that anybody's going to be taking over. It's obviously not going to happen. That's not my point is not predicated on that at all. It's more that I don't want to keep having the conversation of people sort of looking down on the scene or thinking that we can change drastically or wanting to apply their ideas. It's just a frustrating thing to hear.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried that they're going to take over. It's more like that I don't want to hear it anymore, right? That's it.
Yeah.
Is that fair enough?
Yeah. There you go. Okay. Well, anything else you want to say on this topic, or do you think we kind of went long enough on it?
You learn one thing from history. It's that not that many people learn from history.
That has to be a quote, dude.
I'm sure it's...
There's some variety of that quote that's out there, but otherwise, I'm going to attribute it to Ultra David for now. So I think that's actually pretty good. So
except, I missed a good funny joke opportunity where now I have that statement in a way that's totally de novo. I'm the first one ever to have said that. Yeah, you get the point. All right. Let's move on.